The Week in Review with 3 Paris-based correspondents. It's the world this week. Pop legend Prince dies at age 57, and that's what we're going to open the week's show with. Vivian Walt is with us from Time Magazine. Christopher Dickey is the Daily Beast. No, you are a journalist at the Daily Beast. Julia Wona joins us, also journalist, also with the Africa desk at Reporters, Internet Without Borders. I always get it wrong. No. My bad. So Prince, 24 hours ago, Prince, age 57, pop legend, dies. Is this one, for you guys, is this one of those moments where you're going to remember where you were when it happened, or is it not? Do we have music lovers in the room, Julie?
Well, definitely a great loss for culture, for disruptors as well, because he's a great musician who mixed, many musical styles, and also participated in the universalization of African American rhythms. So obviously, culturally, it's a great loss. And also a disruptor because we remember that he fought for, he wanted to break the cycle of these artists who did not own their rights on their music, and was one of the first artists to use the web, the streaming, online streaming music to reach his fans directly. So, and also, interestingly, I think a catalyzer of certain issues of our times, which are related to sexual identity, was known for his androgyny and racial identity as well. Because
I think I hadn't thought about Prince for a long time, to tell you the truth. I mean, when I was watching his videos, to the extent that you can see them today and last night, it was really a flashback to the 80s. I mean, I remember when Prince first hit the scene back in the early 80s, and he seemed revolutionary and strange, and it was hard to know what to make of him. But as I've looked at his stuff and thought about him over the last 24 hours, it strikes me that he is or was really someone of this time, precisely because of the gender issues, because he just played with it. He played with his gender. He gave women huge opportunities in his bands. You sort of couldn't place him in a million different ways. And it was just about making music and having fun and being exciting and having sexual excitement, almost any way you could get it. And I think that was just hugely positive. And I think that people now are going to rediscover him, or discover him for the first time. And I think his reputation is going to be absolutely enormous now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that my early impression of Prince and enduring impression of Prince was the kind of gender bender persona that he had. And I was so surprised today to read something about him, his life. He was a conservative Christian, a Jehovah's Witness. He was virulently against gay marriage, for example, something which I...
So more conservative than you had expected.
Certainly, given the kind of image that he projected of kind of no holds barred, anything goes, it was really surprising. It was a much more kind of complex and layered person than I had imagined. But the great thing about musicians dying, and, we just had David Bowie die.
A strange beginning to a sentence, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say, what is the great thing
what is the fantastic thing about musicians dying?
Well, as opposed to, normal folks like us dying, but musicians leave things that you can enjoy for years to come. And... in a sense, I think what people feel, the sort of shock of somebody like Prince dying, is that his music is so present. And but that will continue. That's going to
that speaks to something that Julie was saying, because Julie was pointing to the fact that he was quite revolutionary in the way he went about his business and the way he took on the labels. And a lot of his material is not on streaming devices, and so it's not as accessible as, for instance, David Bowie's material is.
Well, I read somewhere a few minutes before coming here, I read somewhere that he still has, music that could be, CDs that could be out for the next 100 years. So probably it's a.
He claimed, that's never been proven, I don't think, but he had something which he called the vault, in which he put hundreds of recordings he'd made that he'd never released publicly. Maybe they're totally,
but I think
worthless.
But I think it's, you raise issues about his religion and about his personal inclinations, his politics, even sexual politics. But the great thing about artists is it's the art that counts. And whether he had a vault where we'll be seeing the new art for a long time, or whether we're just replaying the old art, That's really what people will remember. And I think it speaks to our time in a way that, frankly, I hadn't imagined until I started re-examining it over the last 24 hours.
All right, let's talk about Barack Obama now. And you really have your pick of two different topics when it comes to Barack Obama this week. Because, of course, right now he's in London and he's speaking alongside David Cameron and wading into British politics. And that's something that's interesting in its own right. But a couple 24 hours before that, he was in the Middle East meeting the estranged friend, estranged ally that is Saudi Arabia. Your pick? Middle East? Brexit? Chris?
Well, both are fun. I mean, the Middle East, look, there was not a big change, not a big advance. The headlines that came out were sort of predictable. The relations are tense. Frankly, this idea that there was ever a honeymoon or a great relationship with Saudi is off base. It was always a business partnership.
Well, there was a convergence of interest, and I think the question today is
marriage of convenience.
Well, not even marriage. I think is really the wrong. I don't want to comment on marriages generally, but I think it's the wrong. Way
Are they
to
still
approach
friends?
this.
I think is the question that's being asked.
I think they can still work together. They can still work together, and they still will work together. But the idea that the Saudis are going to somehow dictate American policy, that's not going to happen. First of all, it never happened, and it's not going to happen now. The idea that that this administration somehow terribly lost credibility with the Saudis when, for instance, it didn't bomb Syria in 2013. Well, the Reagan administration lost credibility with the Saudis when it pulled out of Beirut in 1984.
So we're making too much of this.
And we're making far too much of this.
But I think that other people make a lot of it. It's not just us. I mean, I was in Tehran a few weeks ago. One of the very first things Iranians always say about Americans are that they're in bed with the Saudis, and that
well,
is
maybe
the
if
kind
the
of
Iranians
popular
would
image.
quit calling us the Great Satan, we wouldn't be in bed with the Saudis.
And now, of course, the Saudis are saying essentially that the Americans are, if not in bed, at least too close to being in bed with the Iranians.
Which is the whole problem, the kind of nervousness that the Americans have kind of switched allegiance in this big, great rivalry that.
But I think the problem with the Saudis is, they would like the United States basically to carry water for them. They would like the United States to defend them. They would like the United States to fight their wars. They would like the United States to do all kinds of things for them. And what Obama has said again and again is, we're not going to do it.
Yeah, he's on record as saying that as calling them free riders.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's also, way back in 2002, he talked about them as our so-called allies, the Saudis.
Julie?
But I think that's very symptomatic of the alliance, Saudi and U.S. alliance during the Obama time. I think it has never been so, loose since the signing of the alliance in 1945.
And there is no signed alliance.
There is one on the Quincy.
No, they met. They came to an agreement. But there's no NATO of Arabia.
Yeah, no, absolutely, of course. No. But
as the Saudis would like.
But I'm wondering to what extent, the energetic transition that the U.S. has begun has not affected also that relationship.
The energy. It's true that when Barack Obama came into power, I was looking at the graph. In fact, it's really quite striking. At about the time that he came into power is about the time when the U.S. started producing more of its own energy and importing a lot less, I beg your pardon, a lot less foreign energy.
Absolutely. So I'm
we were
wondering to what extent.
Importing something like 60% of our oil in 2005. It's back down to 35% now. But what are the Saudis doing? The Saudis are pushing the price of oil down as far as they can possibly push it. Now, why are they doing that? They're doing that to screw all alternatives to cheap oil, including the American fracking industry. You've had, over the last year and a half, all the fracking enterprises, not all of them, but fracking enterprises all over the map in the United States have been shutting down.
So they're pricing the U.S. out of the oil game and Iran.
And Iran, and
that's the idea.
And windmills, and every other kind of alternative energy.
Right.
I mean, that's the Saudi game. When they feel pressure on the market, if there's not huge demand, and there's not right now because slowdowns in China and elsewhere, then they will push the price down so that they can control the market. And that's exactly what they're doing. Now, we didn't hear Obama say, we wish you'd make gas more expensive. But in fact, for a lot of U.S. interests, that would be good.
As soon as Barack Obama was done meeting Gulf leaders, he flew to London. Now, there was the postcard moment that we saw earlier today. He had lunch with the Queen. But more significantly, Barack Obama actually gave his opinion on British politics, and a very important part of it, which is the referendum that's coming up in June. Britons are going to vote whether to keep Britain inside the European Union or not. And this time, Barack Obama wrote an article. He just went on live TV to explain to Britons what he thinks they should vote on.
Well, I mean, obviously, in terms of the way things are normally done, it was highly unusual for a U.S. president to kind of wade so deep into an internal political matter. But the fact is that the U.S. needs Britain as a kind of bridge between Europe and the U.S. It's certainly the closest sort of partner, the closest culturally in many different ways in this side of the world. And I think that Obama feels like he has nothing to lose at this point by speaking out.
Why do we need Britain? I mean, really, why do we need Britain? What does Britain do for us? You've got 500 million people in the EU and you've got 50 million in Britain. What the hell? Why do you need them? So that the city of London can take business away from New York City? I don't know. Is that a good thing? Do we need them because they're going to back us up in wars? I mean, David Cameron put it before the House of Commons when the U.S. was getting ready to attack Syria and totally pulled the rug out from under Obama. And now
you believe, Vivienne, in this special relationship, you believe Barack Obama is emotionally attached to Britain, and that's the basis for his argument?
I don't think it's an emotional thing. Obama is not a particularly emotional person. I mean, he sees things in very sort of pragmatic terms.
Well, Boris Johnson.
But you believe it's important to his politics or to his foreign policy?
I think it's the foreign policy. I think that they don't particularly want to be dealing with, a standalone Britain plus a standalone EU. It's true, it's only 10% of the EU's population. 10% is kind of a significant figure nonetheless, and it's an enormous chunk of the market.
I think there's a not so subtext on this. I think that there's been a lot of irritation about Cameron and his policies and about the Tories generally. I think there was a great disappointment in the way they handled the Syria question. Mm-hmm. The free rider quote in the famous Atlantic
was
actually not at the Saudis. Yep. It was aimed at the Brits and the French, and especially at David Cameron.
Especially the Brits.
Especially Cameron. And now you have Obama says what he believes, which is we don't really need to think that Britain is going to be at the head of the line when we're doing trade negotiations, when it's so small compared to Europe. And you have Boris Johnson coming out and saying things that are really thinly disguised racism, talking about his Kenyan background, saying that he resents Britain because, and Winston Churchill because of the history of Kenya. I mean, what, is he out of his mind?
Well, presumably it's a political play, right? I mean,
well, yeah, it's like a Donald Trump political play. In fact, I think we can say Boris Johnson is acting exactly like the Donald Trump of London.
And therein lies my perfectly found transition to the American primaries. Thank you very much.
I didn't mean to set you up on this, Cyril, but there you go.
That's, of course, was also in the news this week. Tuesday night was a big night and a big win for the frontrunners in the American primaries, both the Democrats and the Republicans, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, really putting some distance between themselves and their main rivals, Bernie Sanders for Hillary Clinton and Ted Cruz, obviously the main rival for Donald Trump. Question: Donald Trump needed to win big to inject momentum into his campaign. This is always such a key part of analysis, and it's always really difficult to quantify it, this momentum issue. Do you think Donald Trump, I don't know who wants to take this one, Donald Trump now has the momentum that he needed and that was sort of failing him over the last few primaries?
Well, I don't think he's got quite what he needs. He needs an aura. He needs an aura of inevitability. And there's still a lot of people in the Republican Party, powers in the Republican Party, who are trying to deprive him of that aura of
the very aura that Hillary Clinton was supposed to have at the beginning of her campaign,
and that she pretty much has now.
I mean, I look, he did win big, very big. And I think that ultimately in November, if Clinton is elected, I think we might look back at Tuesday night as being the night she won it. It feels to me increasingly inevitable that Trump will be the candidate. And in terms of the general election, he seems like a perfect gift to the Democrats at this point.
So does Ted Cruz.
Julie, do you buy into this argument that Donald Trump unelectable and heading into the general election, if he does indeed, as is likely, find himself against Hillary Clinton, then it's she's a shoo-in?
Hillary Clinton is certainly a more reassuring candidate for many Americans.
But is that what American voters want?
Well, I don't know, because I thinking about the debate today, I thought of Bernie Sanders, this socialist, so he calls himself a socialist, outsider who suddenly becomes the runner-up of the Democratic primaries. And I think really there is a sort of generation and vision, separation between Hillary Clinton's voters and Bernie Sanders' voters. Hillary Clinton's, we know she has the votes of the women because of the feminism aspect of her candidacy, and also the Latinos and the blacks because she's the wife of the first black American president, as Clinton is sometimes called. And
she's not the wife of the first black president.
No, the so-called black president because of the policy.
People say that he's the first black president.
and whereas Bernie Sanders
Just didn't want to infuriate Michelle Obama there.
No. It's
Just
just
making it
so
clear.
cold. I should have put brackets. Sorry. I forgot my idea, by the way. Yes, and Bernie Sanders has, a more male electorate with less than 40 years old voters, whereas Hillary has older voters. So there is, I think, a sort of Bernie Sanders benefited from probably a sort of Obama effect because finally, for the past 8 years, we've had Occupy Wall Street, we've had people affected by the subprime prices.
A swing to the left, perhaps.
Absolutely, and we've had the healthcare reform debate, which really opposed two visions of the United States. We now have the university fees debate. I mean, debates perceived as socialist. I mean, I'm quite surprised by that. And I think also he took some of his inspiration from, the Obama campaign, because I looked at some of his slogans. He has a slogan, I think, a future we can believe in, which clearly reminds me of the change we can believe in.
All these...
Which is kind of, a theological, political, messiah thing that, I'm going to save America from its.
Hillary's problem is that she's so mainstream.
Is she going to have to Sanderize herself?
Have to
Sanderize herself. Take on the Bernie Sanders argument.
I mean, I think Bernie Sanders has clearly played a crucial role in injecting certain ideas into the Democratic campaign, which might not have been there before, and tapping into clearly a groundswell of people who just think, systemically something is very wrong. But now it's getting really serious. Now it's getting about who's going to actually run the country. And I think when it comes down to that, I think New York was kind of a disaster for Sanders. His interviews were, really, it didn't look good close up. In the middle of the final days of the campaign, he jetted off to the Vatican. He looked kind of somewhat amateurish.
It was maybe out of his comfort zone.
On this invitation as if he never gets invited anywhere. And
the Pope.
I think it's
Then he doorstepped the Pope. I mean,
he doorstepped the Pope, yes.
I think
All right, we're going to take a very short break. We're back with more news right after this on France 24. Do stay tuned.